Velthor had seen 300 years of peace. He had watched species after species join the Galactic Council, each one following the same patterns, the same rules, the same careful dance of diplomacy and controlled conflict. His scales had turned from bright green to deep emerald over the centuries, marking him as an elder among his people, the Dravik. He served as an observer, a position of great honor. His job was simple: watch new species, assess their capabilities, determine if they posed any threat to the galactic order. The humans were unremarkable at first glance. They had finally developed faster than light travel, stumbling into the greater galaxy like children finding their way into an adult's gathering. Velthor had read the initial reports with little interest. Average height, average strength, slow reflexes compared to most species, fragile bodies that broke easily, short lifespans that barely reached 100 years. They seemed destined to become another minor species, perhaps good traders or artists, but nothing special in the grand scheme of things. The Galactic Council had maintained peace for over 4,000 years through simple methods. When conflicts arose, they were settled through ritualized combat between champions. Casualties were minimized. Warfare followed ancient codes of honor that every species understood and respected. Wars were like games with agreed-upon rules. You fought, you won or lost, and then everyone went home. It was civilized. It was proper. It was how advanced species behaved. Velthor stood on the observation deck of his monitoring vessel, the careful watch, studying the star charts. The humans had established several colony worlds in the past 50 years. One of them, called New Jeju, orbited a pleasant yellow star in a quiet sector. About 4 million humans lived there, farming and building a new society far from their homeworld. It seemed peaceful enough. Then the Krell came. The Krell Dominion was old, powerful, and arrogant. They had been council members for 2,000 years. Their insectoid forms moved with mechanical precision, and their fleet was among the largest in the galaxy. When they decided they wanted the New Jeju system for its mineral resources, they simply took it. According to their interpretation of council law, the humans were too new to have valid territorial claims. It was technically legal, barely legal, but legal enough that the council debated instead of acting. Velthor watched the Krell fleet approach New Jeju. Standard procedure would be simple. The humans would receive the demand for surrender. They would evacuate their civilians. Perhaps there would be a brief symbolic battle between military forces, and then the humans would leave. That was how things worked. Violence was always controlled, always measured, always civilized. The human defense fleet arrived within hours. It was small, perhaps 30 ships against the Krell's 200. The commander was a human named Taesung, a career military officer in his 40s. Velthor pulled up his file. Taesung had served in human space defense for 20 years, had a wife and 2 daughters on Earth, and enjoyed something called baseball. He seemed like a reasonable person. The Krell sent their demand: surrender the planet within 24 hours or face military action. They promised to avoid civilian casualties if the humans cooperated. It was standard. Velthor expected Taesung to begin evacuation procedures. Instead, Taesung sent a response that made Velthor's translator unit pause. As if confused by the words, "Come and take it." The Krell attacked at dawn. Their forces descended on New Jeju with overwhelming superiority. The human fleet should have retreated or been destroyed within hours. Instead, something happened that Velthor had never witnessed in 3 centuries of observing conflicts. The humans fought with a brutality that shocked him to his core. Taesung's ships didn't retreat when damaged. They rammed Krell vessels, exploding themselves to take out larger targets. Human pilots flew their fighters directly into Krell capital ships, sacrificing themselves without hesitation. When a human destroyer lost its weapons, it used its engines to crash into a Krell battlecruiser, destroying both ships and killing everyone aboard. The battle moved to the planet's surface. The Krell expected the humans to defend military installations and evacuate civilians. Instead, every human became a combatant. Engineers turned factories into weapon plants. Doctors treated wounded soldiers so they could return to battle. Teachers organized civilian defense militias. A woman named Hannah, listed as a structural engineer, led teams that turned every building in the capital city into a potential death trap. Rigging explosives and creating ambush points, the Krell followed galactic warfare conventions. They announced their targets before attacking. They offered civilians chances to surrender. They fought with honor. The humans ignored every convention. They used the Krell's honor against them, setting traps where Krell forces expected safe zones. They fought from hospitals, schools, and residential areas, places that should have been off-limits according to galactic law. Velthor watched a particular engagement that made his blood run cold. A Krell ground force had surrounded a human hospital. According to all civilized rules, the hospital should have been neutral ground. The Krell commander announced that he would not attack if the humans inside surrendered peacefully. Instead, a human doctor named Jiwoo appeared on the communication channel. She was young, perhaps 30 years old, and she looked exhausted. "We have 200 wounded soldiers inside," Woo-Woo said calmly. "They need treatment. Give us 72 hours and we'll evacuate." The Krell commander agreed. It was the honorable thing to do. Velthor noted it approvingly. At least some human understood proper conduct. 72 hours later, the hospital exploded. The entire building had been rigged with explosives. The 200 wounded soldiers inside had been real, but Jiwoo had used those 3 days to treat them, prepare them, and turn the hospital into a massive bomb. When the Krell entered to claim the building, the humans detonated it. Hundreds of Krell died instantly. The human soldiers inside died too. Jiwoo died. She had planned it that way from the beginning. Velthor felt sick. This wasn't warfare. This was something else, something the galaxy had forgotten existed. The humans called it total war. Every resource, every person, every structure became a weapon. There were no civilians, no safe zones, no honor, no rules. There was only victory or death. The Krell commander demanded a meeting with Taesung. He threatened to bombard the planet from orbit, killing millions of civilians if the humans didn't surrender immediately. It was a bluff, of course. The Council would never permit such an atrocity. The Krell were counting on the humans. Understanding that galactic law would protect their civilians, Taesung's response was recorded, and would later become famous across the galaxy. He appeared on the communication channel, his face covered in ash and blood, his uniform torn. He looked directly into the camera and spoke in a quiet, steady voice. "You threaten to kill our civilians. Do it. We'll make you pay in blood for every single one. You'll lose so many soldiers that your people will never forgive you. You'll win this planet and lose everything else. We humans learned something long ago, something you've forgotten. We learned that some things are worth dying for. We learned that if you can't win, you make the enemy regret fighting you. We learned that there are no rules in survival. Come and take our world. We'll make it cost you more than it's worth." The Krell attacked with everything they had. The battle lasted 2 weeks. In the end, the Krell won. They took New Jeju, but they lost 60% of their invasion force. 6,000 Krell soldiers dead. Hundreds of ships destroyed or damaged. An entire generation of Krell officers killed in brutal ground combat. The humans lost too, of course. 2 million civilians dead. 3 million evacuated? The entire planet scarred and burned, but as Velthor watched the surviving humans evacuate, singing songs of defiance as they boarded refugee ships, he realized something that terrified him more than anything he had witnessed in the battle. The humans didn't seem defeated. They seemed angry. They seemed like they were just getting started. The galaxy had been at peace for 4,000 years. The galaxy had forgotten what real war looked like. The humans remembered. And now they were teaching everyone else. The council chambers erupted in chaos after the Battle of New Jeju. Representatives from 200 species argued, shouted, and demanded action. The Krell had technically won, but everyone knew they had been humiliated. No species in living memory had inflicted such casualties on a council member. The humans had broken every unspoken rule of civilized warfare. Some species demanded humanity be quarantined, cut off from the rest of the galaxy until they learned to behave properly. Others argued that the Krell had started the conflict and deserved what they got. Velther stood in the back of the chamber, listening. His report on human military capabilities had been circulated to every council member. He had tried to be objective, but his own horror had seeped into the words. These humans were dangerous, not because they were strong or advanced, but because they refused to follow the rules that kept galactic warfare civilized. The Council assigned him a new task. Someone needed to embed with human military forces to understand them better. Someone needed to figure out if humanity was a warrior species that would threaten galactic peace, or if New Jeju had been an anomaly. Velther was the obvious choice. He had already observed them. He spoke several Earth languages through his translator. He was respected among his own people for his fairness and wisdom. He accepted the assignment with deep reluctance. Something about the humans unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. They weren't like any species he had encountered before. 3 weeks later, Velther found himself aboard a human battleship called Soul's Pride. The ship was smaller than equivalent Dravik vessels, built with efficiency rather than elegance. The corridors were narrow and lit with harsh white lights. Everything smelled of recycled air and human sweat. The crew numbered 800, and they watched him with curious eyes as he was escorted to meet the captain. Captain Dong Hyen was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He greeted Velther warmly, shaking his clawed hand with surprising gentleness. His office was cramped but tidy, decorated with photographs of family members and a strange plant in a small pot. "Welcome aboard," Dong Hyen said in accented but clear galactic standard. "I understand you're here to observe us, to figure out if we're monsters who need to be locked away." Velther's translator hesitated at the bluntness, but he appreciated the honesty. "I'm here to understand your military culture," he said carefully. "What happened at New Jeju was ... unusual?" Dong Hyen nodded slowly. "Unusual for you. Normal for us." He gestured to a chair. "Let me tell you about humans, observer. We're not a warrior species. Most of my crew were civilians 2 years ago. Lieutenant Young Mi was an art teacher. Engineer Kyung Soo designed children's toys. Our chief medical officer was a veterinarian. We didn't want to be soldiers. We became soldiers because we had to." Over the following weeks, Velther embedded himself in the ship's daily routines. He ate in the mess hall with the crew, attended briefings, and watched them work. What he found confused him deeply. These humans were nothing like he expected. They laughed constantly, making jokes he didn't understand. They played games during their off hours. They showed him pictures of their families and asked about his homeworld with genuine interest. Lieutenant Young Mi, the former art teacher, invited him to a painting session. About 20 crew members gathered in a cargo bay converted into a recreation space. They painted on canvases while listening to strange human music. Young Mi painted a sunset over mountains, talking about how much she missed Earth's sky. Others painted portraits, abstract designs, or scenes from memory. Velther watched in fascination. These people were artists, dreamers, creators. Engineer Kyung Soo showed him the engine room, explaining the ship's systems with enthusiasm. He talked about his children back home, 2 boys who loved building things. He showed Velther pictures on his personal device. The boys were smiling, holding toy spaceships their father had designed. Kyung Soo's eyes were full of love and longing. "I miss them every day," Kyung Soo said quietly. "But I'm here so they can grow up safe. So they never have to fight like we do." Velther began to think he had misjudged humans. They weren't monsters. They were ordinary people forced into military service. Perhaps New Jeju had been a desperate aberration, a panicked response to overwhelming force. Then came the briefing that changed everything. A specialist named Dae-Young, who had been a history professor before the war, gave a presentation on human military history. Velther attended out of curiosity, expecting to hear about their brief, minor conflicts. What he heard instead made his blood freeze. Dae-Young displayed casualty figures from something called World War II. 70 to 85 million dead. Entire cities destroyed by firebombing. Nuclear weapons used on civilian populations. Industrial-scale genocide? Millions of soldiers dying in single battles. The war had consumed the entire planet for 6 years, and it was only one of hundreds of major wars humans had fought against each other. We've been fighting each other for our entire history, De-Jong explained calmly. We've perfected every form of warfare imaginable. We know how to destroy cities, break armies, and wage campaigns that last decades. We know because we did it to ourselves over and over again for thousands of years. Velthor felt sick. These gentle people, these artists and engineers and parents, came from a species that had nearly destroyed itself repeatedly. They knew horror because they had created it. They understood total war because they had waged it against their own kind. Why are you telling me this? Velthor asked. De-Jong looked at him with sad eyes. Because you need to understand. We're not proud of our history, but we can't forget it either. When the Krell attacked New Jeju, we didn't invent new tactics. We just used old ones. Very old ones. Tactics we hoped we'd never need again. The alarm sounded 3 days later. A Krell raiding force had attacked a mining station in neutral space, killing the crew and stealing the refined minerals. It was a minor incident, but it was also a test. The Krell were seeing if humans would respond. If they would follow galactic conventions or revert to their brutal tactics. Velthor joined a boarding party led by Sergeant Oneshik, a career soldier who had served in human military forces for 15 years. They approached the station in a small assault craft along with 20 Marines. Velthor expected a straightforward fight. Clear the station, capture or kill the Krell raiders, secure the facility. It was standard security work. The attack began normally enough. The Marines breached the station's docking bay and advanced in formation, clearing rooms methodically. Then things changed. The Krell had set up defensive positions in the station's central habitat ring. They held the high ground with superior numbers and firepower. Oneshik ordered a retreat, pulling his forces back to a maintenance section. Velthor thought they were regrouping for another assault. Instead, Oneshik had his Marines rig explosive charges throughout the maintenance corridors. Then he ordered 2 wounded Marines to position themselves in clear view at the end of a long hallway. Velthor understood too late. The wounded Marines were bait. When the Krell advanced to capture them, Oneshik detonated the charges, collapsing the entire corridor. Dozens of Krell died instantly, buried under tons of debris. The 2 wounded Marines died too. They had known they would. They had volunteered. The battle continued in ways that violated everything Velthor thought he knew about civilized combat. When the Krell tried to flank through ventilation systems, the humans filled the vents with toxic gas. When the Krell took hostages, Oneshik decompressed entire sections, killing hostages and Krell alike rather than negotiate. A private named Sujin lost her arm to Krell fire but continued fighting, using her remaining hand to throw grenades until she collapsed from blood loss. The humans won. They always seemed to win, no matter the cost. Velthor stood among the bodies afterward, watching the Marines check for survivors. They were gentle with their own wounded, careful with captured Krell, and professional in securing the station. Young Mi arrived with a medical team and immediately began treating everyone, human and Krell alike, with equal care. That night, Velthor found Oneshik in the mess hall, eating a simple meal alone. The sergeant looked exhausted, his face gray with fatigue. "Why?" Velthor asked, sitting across from him. "Why fight like that? You could have negotiated. You could have retreated and called for reinforcements. Why sacrifice your own people so brutally?" Oneshik looked at him for a long moment. "Because we win," he said simply. "In war, there's no second place. You win or you die. We learned that lesson. We paid for it in blood over thousands of years. The galaxy forgot that lesson because you've been at peace so long. But we remember, and will do whatever it takes to make sure our people survive." Velthor realized the true horror then. The humans weren't monsters. They were survivors who had learned to become monsters when necessary. They could turn their humanity on and off like a switch. They could be artists and murderers, parents and soldiers, gentle and brutal, sometimes all within the same hour, and that terrified him more than anything else. The Galactic Council met in emergency sessions 6 months after the mining station incident. The chamber was tense, filled with representatives who spoke in hushed, worried tones. The humans had been involved in 17 more conflicts with the Krell, and they had won every single one. The casualties were always disproportionate. The Krell lost dozens of soldiers for every human death. Their fleets retreated from human ships. Their ground forces refused to engage human marines in close combat. Ambassador Minasio represented humanity at the council. She was an elderly woman, nearly 70 years old, with silver hair and a calm, measured way of speaking. She stood at the central podium while council members accused humanity of barbaric warfare tactics, of violating the spirit of galactic law, of threatening the peaceful order that had existed for millennia. Minasio listened to every accusation without interrupting. When they finally fell silent, she spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. "You built a galaxy where wars are games," she said. "You made rules that minimize death and destruction. You created a system where conflicts are resolved with minimal cost. That's admirable. That's civilized. That's what we all should want." She paused, looking around at the hundreds of representatives. "But we didn't know those rules when we evolved. We came from a world where war wasn't a game. It was survival. We fought each other for resources, territory, and ideology. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. We learned to fight in ways you've forgotten exist." A Krell representative stood, his insectoid features clicking in anger. "You must be controlled. You're too dangerous to be allowed unrestricted access to galactic society." Minasio met his gaze steadily. "The Krell attacked our colony without provocation. They killed our people. We defended ourselves. If that makes us dangerous, then perhaps you should ask yourselves why you're more concerned about our methods than about the Krell's aggression." The council split down the middle. Some species wanted humanity quarantined or expelled. Others saw humanity as a useful counter to the Krell, who had grown arrogant with their power. No decision was reached, and the council adjourned with the matter unresolved. Velthor watched the proceedings from the observer gallery. He had submitted 3 more reports on human military capabilities, each one more detailed than the last. He had tried to explain what he had learned, but words failed him. How could he make the council understand that humanity's strength wasn't in their technology or numbers, but in their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory? He had become something he never expected during his time aboard Soul's Pride. He had become friends with humans. Medic J1 had saved his life during a Krell ambush, carrying him 3 kilometers through hostile territory while under fire. Pilot Sun Hee had shared stories about her daughter, showing him pictures and videos, making him laugh with tales of childhood mischief. Commander Taesung, who had led the defense of New Jeju, treated him as a comrade rather than an observer, asking his opinion on tactical matters and listening to his concerns. These friendships made everything harder. Velthor understood now that humans weren't monsters, but he also understood that they were capable of monstrous things. The question that haunted him was whether the galaxy needed that capability, or whether humanity would eventually threaten everyone. The answer came in fire and death. The Krell, frustrated by their repeated defeats and humiliated by humanity's success, made a decision that would change everything. They committed an atrocity so severe that even their allies in the council turned against them. Without warning, without provocation, they glassed the civilian colony of New Bizen from orbit. Velthor watched the footage with horror. New Bizen had been purely civilian, home to 3 million people. There were no military installations, no warships, no weapons. Just farms, homes, schools, and families. The Krell fleet had appeared without warning and bombarded the planet for 6 hours. When they left, the surface was molten glass. Nothing survived. Not one person. The galaxy erupted in outrage. Even species that had supported the Krell condemned the attack. The council voted unanimously to impose sanctions. But Velthor knew it wouldn't matter. The Krell had crossed a line and the humans would respond. The only question was how severe that response would be. He was aboard Soul's Pride when the news reached the ship. He stood in the mess hall with about 200 crew members, watching the broadcast on the large screens. When the images appeared showing the glassed planet, the burned cities, the complete destruction, the room fell utterly silent. No one cried. No one shouted. No one showed any emotion at all. The silence was more terrifying than any scream could have been. Velthor felt his scales prickling with instinctive fear. He had seen humans angry before, seen them in combat, seen them brutal and efficient. But he had never seen them like this. They were cold, focused, utterly calm in a way that promised terrible things. Captain Donghyan's voice came over the ship-wide communication system. All hands, prepare for immediate departure. We have new orders. This is not a drill. This is war. The crew moved with mechanical precision. Young Mi, who usually painted in her spare time, checked her weapons with steady hands. Kyung-soo, who missed his children so much, prepared the engines for maximum combat output. Every crew member transformed from ordinary people into instruments of war, and they did it without hesitation, without discussion. Without doubt, Velthor found Taesung in the command center. The commander stood at a tactical display, studying fleet formations. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were hard and cold. "Taesung," Velthor said carefully, "what are you going to do?" Taesung looked at him. "We're going to teach the galaxy a lesson," he said quietly. "We're going to show everyone what happens when you murder our civilians. We're going to make the Krell regret every choice that led them to New Bizan. The Council will stop you. They'll enforce peace." The Council voted for sanctions. Words and economic restrictions. That's not enough. Not for 3 million dead? Taesung turned back to the display. "We tried to follow your rules. We tried to be civilized. The Krell showed us that civilization is weakness. So we're going to show them what we really are." Fleet Admiral Insu commanded the human response. He was a tall man, nearly 60 years old, with a reputation for brilliant strategy and absolute ruthlessness. He had been a military theorist before the war, teaching at Earth's most prestigious military academy. Now he commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled. 300 warships, countless support vessels, and over 50,000 Marines. The entire force gathered in neutral space, preparing for an operation that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Velthor attended the final briefing before the fleet departed. He stood in a massive hangar bay aboard the flagship, surrounded by thousands of soldiers and officers. Insu stood on a raised platform, his voice amplified so everyone could hear. "The Krell believe they can intimidate us through terror," Insu said. "They believe we'll sue for peace after New Bizan. They believe we'll accept counsel, mediation, and some form of compensation for our dead." He paused, looking out over the assembled forces. "They're wrong. We're going to Krell space. We're going to their homeworld. And we're going to show them what total war really means." A science officer named Boram approached Velthor after the briefing. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had been working on weapons modifications for 72 hours straight. "You should leave," Boram said bluntly. "Get off this ship before we reach Krell space." "What we're about to do, ... You don't want to be part of it. What are you planning?" Velthor asked, though he feared he already knew. Boram looked at him with hollow eyes. "Payback. 3 million dead. 3 million lives that ended in fire and terror. We're going to make the Krell understand what they took from us. We're going to hurt them so badly that no species will ever consider attacking human civilians again. We're going to become the monsters they made us." Velthor tried to convince them to reconsider. He spoke with Donghyan, with Taesung, with Insu himself. He argued that revenge wouldn't bring back the dead, that excessive retaliation would only make things worse, that the Council would intervene if humanity went too far. Every argument fell on deaf ears. Finally, he confronted Taesung one last time in the captain's office. "You're going to cross lines you can't uncross," Velther said desperately. "You're going to do things that will haunt you forever. Please listen to me. Don't let grief turn you into the enemy you're fighting." Taesung was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled up a file on his display. Images appeared, bodies, children's bodies. Burned, broken, destroyed. The few remains that had been recovered from New Bizan's surface. "My wife's sister lived there," Taesung said quietly. "Her husband. Their 3 children. Ages 8, 6, and 4. They died screaming as the atmosphere burned away. And you want me to show restraint? You want me to follow rules?" He looked at Velther with eyes full of cold fury. "We tried to be civilized. We tried to follow your galaxy's rules. The Krell taught us that our mercy was weakness. Now we're going to teach them what happens when humans stop being merciful." The fleet departed the next day. Velther remained aboard Sol's Pride, unable to leave, unable to look away. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Krell Prime's star system. Velther stood on Sol's Pride's bridge, watching the tactical displays with growing dread. The Krell had expected them. Their home defense fleet, numbered over 600 ships, 3 times the size of the human force. Orbital defense platforms ringed the planet like a crown of weapons. Millions of soldiers waited on the surface, ready to repel any invasion. It should have been impossible. The humans should have retreated, should have called for reinforcements, should have accepted that revenge wasn't worth the cost. Instead, Admiral Insu gave a single order that would be studied in military academies for generations: execute Operation Reaper. The battle began in a way that confused the Krell. The human fleet didn't engage their defensive forces. Commander Yun-Hee led her fighter squadrons straight past the Krell warships, ignoring them completely. Her targets weren't military. She went after infrastructure. Supply stations exploded. Shipyards collapsed in fire. Communication satellites went dark. Food production facilities on orbital platforms were destroyed. Fuel depots burned in the vacuum of space. Velther watched in horror as the humans systematically dismantled everything that kept Krell Prime's orbital infrastructure functioning. They weren't fighting a battle. They were conducting a siege. They were cutting the planet off from the galaxy, isolating it, preparing it for something worse. The Krell fleet tried to intercept them. Admiral Sangho's heavy battleships engaged the defenders, but not in the way Velther expected. The humans didn't fight to destroy the Krell fleet. They fought to delay it, to keep it occupied while Yun-Hee's squadrons completed their work. Human ships took terrible damage, accepting losses to maintain their positions. 3 destroyers were destroyed. A battleship lost its entire port side to Krell fire, but continued fighting. When the orbital infrastructure was destroyed, Sangho began the second phase. He targeted the planet's surface, but not with the indiscriminate bombardment the Krell had used on New Bizan. The humans were precise. They hit military installations, command centers, communication hubs. They followed the technical letter of galactic warfare law while violating its spirit. Each strike was justified, each target legitimate, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Kinetic impactors fell from orbit like the judgment of angry gods. They struck military bases with the force of small nuclear weapons. The shockwaves destroyed everything for kilometers around each impact site. Cities near military installations were damaged despite not being targeted. The humans claimed they were following the rules. They were only attacking military targets. The collateral damage wasn't their responsibility. Velther understood the strategy. The humans were teaching the Krell what New Bizan had felt like, but doing it in a way that the Council couldn't condemn. They were showing the galaxy how to wage total war while technically following all the rules. Then came the third phase, and Velther realized he had underestimated human cruelty. Captain Yunji commanded the Special Operations Forces, small teams of highly trained soldiers who infiltrated the planet during the bombardment. They didn't attack civilians. They didn't commit atrocities. They did something far more effective. They hijacked every communication network on the planet. Every screen, every broadcast system, every device capable of displaying images. And then they showed the Krell population what had happened to New Bison, raw, uncensored footage of the attack. Cities burning, people dying, children screaming as the atmosphere caught fire. 3 million deaths shown in excruciating detail, broadcast across an entire world. A human infiltrator named Junji left messages throughout the planetary network. Simple words repeated over and over, "You did this to us. Now you'll understand what you took. Now you'll know our pain. Now you'll fear what we fear." The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. The Krell population panicked. They had known about the New Bison attack, of course, but seeing it, experiencing it through the humans' eyes, understanding the horror they had inflicted, broke something in their collective psyche. Parents looked at their children and saw human children burning. Soldiers realized they were fighting people who had suffered the unthinkable and had come for revenge. The Krell military began to fracture. Units refused orders. Soldiers surrendered without fighting. Officers reported widespread psychological breakdown among their troops. They had never faced an enemy that fought with such calculated psychological brutality. The humans weren't just trying to win. They were trying to traumatize an entire civilization. Specialist Hyjin, a young woman who had been a computer programmer before the war, led the cyber warfare efforts. She infiltrated Krell military networks and spread false information. Reports of massive human reinforcements arriving. Warnings about biological weapons that didn't exist. Fake orders that sent Krell forces into ambush. She created chaos in their command structure, making them paranoid and uncertain. The Krell tried to counterattack, tried to regain control, but every effort failed. The humans had studied their enemy thoroughly. They knew Krell psychology, Krell culture, Krell military doctrine. They exploited every weakness, pressed every advantage, used every tactic that might break their enemy's will to fight. Velther found himself in the command center when the Krell government sent their first surrender offer. It had been 3 weeks since the operation began. The Krell military was in disarray. Their orbital infrastructure was destroyed. Their population was terrified. Their economy was collapsing. They offered peace terms, reparations, anything to make the humans stop. Admiral Insu rejected the offer without discussion. "Not enough," was all he said. The humans continued their campaign. They didn't occupy territory. They didn't land ground forces. They just kept the pressure constant, kept the fear alive, kept reminding the Krell that this was what happened when you murdered human civilians. Every day brought new attacks, new psychological operations, new demonstrations of human capabilities. Velther couldn't take it anymore. He confronted Taesung in the captain's quarters. "You've won," he said, his voice shaking. "They've surrendered. They're broken. You've made your point. Why won't you stop?" Taesung looked at him with eyes that seemed decades older than they had been a month ago. "You asked me once why we fight the way we do. I'll tell you now. We fight this way because we never want to fight again. We're making the Krell suffer so that every species in the galaxy sees what happens when you attack humanity. We're becoming the monsters you feared so that no one will ever make us become monsters again. You're killing people who had nothing to do with New Bison. You're traumatizing children who never hurt anyone. 3 million civilians died at New Bison," Taesung said quietly. "Children who never hurt anyone. Families who just wanted to live in peace. The Krell made that choice for us. We're just making sure they understand the consequences." The council finally intervened. They sent a fleet of peacekeepers, representatives from a dozen species, all demanding immediate ceasefire. The Krell had agreed to unconditional surrender. The war was over. Humanity had won. Now they needed to stop before they became something the galaxy could never forgive. Ambassador Minesio presented humanity's terms to a joint Council Krell session. Her demands were harsh but not impossible. Full reparations for New Bison, war crime trials for the Krell leadership who had ordered the attack. A permanent human seat on the Council with full voting rights. Recognition that human warfare doctrine was legitimate under galactic law. The Council agreed to everything immediately. The Krell signed the treaty within hours. They would have agreed to anything to make the humans leave their space. The human fleet withdrew. Operation Reaper ended after 4 weeks of sustained operations. The Krell hadn't been destroyed, but they had been fundamentally changed. Their government collapsed and reformed. Their military was reduced to a fraction of its former size. Their economy would take decades to recover. Most significantly, their people would carry psychological scars for generations. Velthor stood on Sol's Pride's observation deck as the ship departed Krell space. The crew was quiet, subdued. There was no celebration, no joy in victory. They had done what they set out to do, but the cost had been high. Not in lives, but in something harder to quantify. They had lost pieces of themselves, done things that would haunt them forever. Young Mi found him there. The art teacher turned warrior looked exhausted, her face gaunt. "You're going to write about this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Velthor said. "The council needs to understand what happened here." "Tell them the truth," Young Mi said. "Tell them we didn't enjoy this. Tell them we hated every moment. Tell them we did it anyway, because some lessons can only be taught in blood." She paused, looking out at the stars. "Tell them we became monsters so we could stop being monsters. Tell them we fought this war so we'd never have to fight another one like it." Velthor watched her walk away, her shoulders slumped with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He understood now what the humans had done. They had committed themselves to a terrible path, knowing it would change them forever, because they believed it was necessary. They had looked into the abyss of total war, and instead of turning away. 3 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways both subtle and profound. Humanity had taken its seat on the Galactic Council, and no species objected. The humans had proven themselves too dangerous to exclude, too powerful to ignore. But they were also feared. Other species avoided human space when possible. Diplomats who dealt with humanity did so carefully, always aware that beneath the polite words and professional courtesy lay something ancient and terrifying. Velthor returned to his homeworld after the war. He tried to resume his old life, his old duties as an observer, but he found he couldn't. His reports on humanity had made him famous, in a way. Every species wanted to know about the humans, wanted to understand them, wanted to prepare for the possibility that they might someday have to fight them. Velthor gave lectures, wrote papers, advised military commanders. He became the galaxy's foremost expert on human warfare, but at night he dreamed of burning cities and dying soldiers. He heard Taesung's voice explaining why humans fought the way they did. He saw Young Mi's exhausted face as she talked about becoming monsters. He remembered the cold efficiency with which humanity had broken the Krell, and he wondered if he had witnessed something the galaxy should have stayed ignorant of. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon. Simple, formal, requesting his presence at a memorial service on New Bizan. The planet had been terraformed again, rebuilt, restored to something resembling its former state. 3 million people had died there. Now they were remembered there. The message came from Ambassador Min Seo herself, asking him to attend as a representative of the wider galactic community. Velthor almost declined. He wasn't sure he could face the humans again, wasn't sure he wanted to remember what he had seen them do. But something compelled him to accept. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the need to understand if the humans he had known still existed, or if the war had consumed them completely. He arrived on New Bizan to find a world transformed. The new cities were beautiful, built with a mix of human and alien architectural styles. Gardens bloomed everywhere, memorials to those who had died. The atmosphere hummed with life and hope. It should have been impossible. 3 years wasn't enough time to heal wounds this deep. The memorial service was held in a vast amphitheater carved into a hillside. Thousands of people attended, human and alien alike. Velthor found himself seated among the guests of honor, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to leave. He scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. He found them. Medic J1 stood near the back, wearing civilian clothes, his hair longer than Velthor remembered. He looked healthy, peaceful. When he saw Velthor, he smiled and waved. Later, during the reception, He explained that he ran a hospital now, treating everyone regardless of species. He showed pictures of his staff, a mix of humans and aliens working together. Pilot Sun-hee had retired from the military. She lived in one of the new cities with her daughter, who was now 12 years old and wanted to be a scientist. Sun-hee taught at a local school, training the next generation of pilots in peaceful exploration rather than combat. Commander Taesung had changed the most. He looked older, grayer, but somehow lighter. He led humanitarian efforts across human space, coordinating relief missions to disaster zones on any world that requested help. He greeted Velther warmly, embracing him like an old friend. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Taesung said. "After everything we did? After everything you saw?" "I had to understand," Velther replied. "I had to see if the people I knew still existed." "We're still here," Taesung said quietly. "Changed, maybe?" "Scarred, definitely. But still here. Still trying to be better than we were." Captain Dong Hyen was there too, retired from active service. He taught at a military academy now, training young officers. But his curriculum focused on ethical warfare, on minimizing casualties, on finding solutions that didn't require becoming monsters. He talked about the importance of knowing when to fight and when to seek peace. Velther listened to the memorial service with a heavy heart. Speakers talked about the 3 million who had died. They read names, thousands upon thousands of names, each one a life ended too soon. They shared stories, memories, moments of joy and love that had been stolen by Krell weapons. The pain was real, immediate, even after 3 years, but there was no hatred in the ceremony. No calls for continued revenge. No glorification of the war that followed. The humans mourned their dead and moved forward. They had fought their war, won their victory, and made their point. Now they were focused on building rather than destroying. During the reception, Velther found Ambassador Min Seo standing alone, looking out over the new city. She had aged significantly. Humans age so quickly, their lives burning bright and brief like candles. She welcomed him with a tired smile. "Do you understand us now?" she asked. It was the question she had asked 3 years ago, before Operation Reaper, before everything changed. Velther thought carefully. 3 years of reflection had given him perspective he hadn't had before. "I understand you're capable of terrible things," he said slowly. "But you choose not to be terrible most of the time. That's what makes you truly frightening. You have the capacity for horror, but the discipline to control it. You can be monsters when necessary, but you prefer to be human." Min Seo nodded. "We learned that the hard way. From each other. Humans did terrible things to humans for thousands of years. We nearly destroyed ourselves repeatedly. We know exactly what we're capable of because we've done it to ourselves. Every atrocity we used against the Krell, we invented for use against other humans. That's why we can be gentle now. We know the alternative. We've lived it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the rebuilt city. Then Min Seo spoke again, her voice heavy with something Velther couldn't quite identify. "We never wanted to be warriors. We wanted to explore, create, learn. But the galaxy needed us to be weapons. So we became weapons. The question now is whether we can become something else again." The answer came sooner than anyone expected. News arrived during the reception, broadcast on every communication device simultaneously. A new species had entered the galaxy, the Vrax Collective. They were powerful, numerous, and hostile. They had attacked the Dravik colony world without warning or provocation. The assault was overwhelming, brutal, conducted with technologies the Council had never seen before. The Dravik were calling for help, but the Council was paralyzed with fear. The Vrax were unlike anything the galaxy had faced in millennia. Velther watched as the humans received the news. He saw their faces change, saw the transformation begin again. The gentle people he had been talking to started becoming soldiers once more. It was subtle, but he knew the signs now. The way Taesung's expression hardened. The way J1 immediately started mentally cataloging medical supplies. The way Sun-hee checked her communication device. Already receiving recall orders, the Dravik government officially requested human military assistance within hours. The Council, recognizing that humanity was the only force capable of facing this new threat, endorsed the request. Humanity was being asked to do what it did best: become monsters on behalf of the galaxy. Velthor made a decision that surprised himself. He volunteered to serve as liaison between human and Dravik forces. He would return to war, would witness humanity's brutality again, would watch them do terrible things in the name of defense. But he understood now that someone needed to. Someone needed to be willing to be the monster when monsters came calling. General Insu, who had planned Operation Reaper, accepted his offer. "Welcome back," the general said simply. "I hope you're ready. The Vraks are worse than the Krell. This won't be easy." "Nothing with humans ever is," Velthor replied. Surprising himself with his own dry humor, he found himself aboard Soul's Pride once again, now commanded by Captain Young Mi, the former art teacher. The ship had been refitted, upgraded, prepared for war against an unknown enemy. The crew welcomed him like family, showing him to his old quarters, catching him up on 3 years of news and gossip. It felt like coming home to a home he had never wanted, but couldn't imagine being without Dot as the fleet prepared to depart. Velthor stood on the bridge beside Young Mi. She looked nervous but determined. "Are you afraid of fighting alongside us again?" she asked. Velthor considered the question carefully. He thought about everything he had seen, everything he had learned, everything that haunted his dreams. "No," he said finally. "I'm afraid of what it means that I'm grateful you exist." The galaxy was peaceful because no one remembered how to truly fight. We'd forgotten that real peace requires the strength to defend it. Humans remember. You never forgot. Young Mi smiled sadly. Someone has to be the monsters when monsters come calling. We learned that lesson on Earth, fighting each other for thousands of years. Now we're teaching it to the galaxy. Maybe someday the lesson will stick and no one will need to be monsters anymore. But until then, humanity will do what's necessary. Velthor finished. The fleet departed for Dravik space. Velthor watched the stars streak past as they entered faster than light travel. He knew what was coming: war, death, horror, humanity doing terrible things because someone needed to. But he also knew something else now.